Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Medical Myths, the show usually about what not to do with your body. But today we have a very special episode that is 6 years in the making. We've been putting this off way too long, and Cynthia reminded me that, hey, we still have to do this show. Um, and so I'm very excited to be here with none other than Cynthia McDonald, who has a great topic and some great experience. So without further ado, I'll let you take it away. Would you like to share who you are, where people can find you on the internet, and then kind of what makes this topic so meaningful to you?
Sure. So, as Ben just said, my name is Cynthia. I am a social worker in the city of Chicago. I've worked in the socials for about 6 right by now, and I started my career off working with patients who were living with HIV, and I I took a lot of time to learn about their lives and the things that they needed and also how we who may not necessarily be living with the disease can still be a resource for them, especially when it comes to being an ally to the community. And oh, and yeah, I forgot to say where you can find me at. I I have a channel called The Roots Matter. I talk about news, politics, social justice, and whatever happens to also float across my mind, and they all collide on the interwebs. And yeah, so and I do commentary on just different events that happen to this very day. So yes, so this is one of the reasons why I I know that, like, when we first met and we were on like different podcasts together, that you were a student
Mhm.
and I was
Yep.
starting and and I was starting out in healthcare. So a matter of fact, I just finished my my certification for community health maybe like a year before I started into social work. And and then I ended up going into that field, first like patient navigation and then case management. And he was like, oh yeah, oh, you do some stuff that seems kind of important. I said, I guess. And and he said, yeah, we should talk about it. I said, yeah, let's. And but it's cool because it it there's been a lot of developments in HIV, like the research of HIV, the study of HIV, and even how it shows up with people nowadays. And I'm just excited just to just talk about it, because it's something that, even though that like the population of people that I deal with now is not necessarily always living with the disease, there is always a possibility that they could, live with the disease, especially if, education is not there, protection is not there, different things that are not necessarily talked about when it comes to HIV and the possibility of infection um, happens to be. There you go.
Yeah, this is a very in-depth topic. There's a lot to say about this, and this is one too where multiple different communities kind of intersect on this particular issue. It's a topic that has disproportionately affected minority groups kind of
Mhm.
across the board. And the way that people are treated definitely reflects the social opinions about these minority groups. So I'm really excited to collaborate on this particular topic.
Mhm.
But I know the climate has changed a lot, even just in the past 6 years since we initially were planning on talking about this. But for the people in the audience who maybe their kind of exposure to the topic of HIV was in the 1980s, and
Yeah.
we've grown a lot since then. But where would you say we are now compared to the 1980s? Like, what has changed? What's the same? Kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would definitely say that the the perception of HIV infection has changed very much so, and also, of course, treatment, because as time goes on, more dollars has been invested into research of HIV, but that was not without cost. When HIV and AIDS were first discovered, it was mostly white gay men that were being infected. And as time went on, we it was kind if it was ignored because of the stigma of just being gay alone, um, was something that people hushed about. They didn't want to talk about. Obviously, then and even now, being a part of the queer community is definitely stigmatized, and people who happen to be in the queer community are marginalized, and health especially. And I know that the clinic that I was working with at the time, when we were really studying the effects and working with people living with HIV, was started in the 1970s. And it was mostly because the person who started it was a gay man who could not receive treatment from traditional hospitals when it came to health. So he decided to go ahead and start his own clinic, and they used to open on Thursdays for a few hours where people can, just get like, care, something that is like, a checkup, making sure that, like, if you are experiencing any type of symptoms that are not making you feel that makes you feel bad, it can be looked at, treated, possibly diagnosed, all the whole nine. As time went on, the clinic grew. It became not only just one clinic, but then a series of clinics, and they were definitely in one of the forefronts of research when it came to HIV. Now, if we go back to the 80s, and we see, okay, this is the group of people that's being infected. Of course, it's ignored. Then we start to see, now, not only are gay white men being infected, but gay communities, no matter what race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background you are beginning to experience this as well, right? And and then it morphed into, as activism started to become a thing. I'm pretty sure, like, if any persons watch the series called Pose on FX, they really talked about the activism that was involved with HIV and AIDS, especially with ACT UP. They used to have what they call, they used to not only just do sit-ins, they used to do die-ins, where they would go into places like churches and other public facilities, and literally, like, just lay their bodies down to show how your hate and your speech is literally killing us, because it is causing people to ignore the plight. It's the causing people to not give a damn about human lives that are being taken by this very deadly disease. And it started to look different when a child named Ryan White was infected, I want to say in the mid to late 80s. And he was infected by a blood transfusion. And then that's when people said, oh, so it's not just gay people, it's not just queer people, it's not just, trans women who are being affected by this. And a lot of it is because the education around even how infection would spread was was moot. You didn't talk about it. about it. They say, okay, well, if you have gay sex, you're going to get AIDS. Like, no, that's not the way this works, right? And so when Ryan White became infected, that's when you start to see more celebrities get on board as far as like, you know, HIV awareness and education. And then I wish that I could remember specifically the group that it was called, but um there was like a total of, I want to say, about 200 HIV and AIDS awareness um, organizations that got together and penned a letter to Congress, basically demanding and pushing for more money to be allocated to HIV and AIDS research. And and then that's when we get the formation of the Ryan White Fund. Um, and this is where money is appropriated every year through Congress that's supposed to go to not only HIV research, but also to other resources as well, such as making sure that people are attached to what we call in the social work world, the social determinants of health. You know, making sure that you are housing secure, making sure that you are, you know, you have income, making sure that, you know, you have health care, insurance, like all these different things that, you know, possibly a lot of people take for granted is also a thing that, you know, a people who may be living with the disease, who are not at a high socioeconomic stature, don't necessarily have offhand, let alone even know how to get. Part of my job was helping people with the social determinants of health and also making sure they had access to medication. And also, another thing that has changed exponentially is the treatments. You know, when you finally started to see treatments and medications available for HIV, a lot of them used to be these huge pills. Sometimes you had to take a cocktail pills. I remember when I was going through HIV counseling training, they had about 3 different people come to speak with us, and they've been living with the disease for like 20, 30 years, right? And I remember one man was talking about how I used to take 30 pills every day, and now I only take 2. He repeated that,
Wow.
but Dr. Ben, he repeated that 3 times, back to back to back. And you should have seen the look on his face because he was still in disbelief that he went from 30 pills to 28 pills to 20 to
Wow.
15 to 10 to 2, you know?
That's incredible.
It right? And I mean, can you just think, I mean, like, I have to take you know, I'm outing myself, you know, I take hypertension medication because reasons, right? I balk at taking 1 pill a day. Like, "Good, I don't
Mhm.
feel like taking it." And it's like, and it's not a big pill. And, you know, and thank goodness, knock on wood, my numbers, my blood pressure numbers are really good, right? But at the same time, can you just imagine like this, I having to constantly taking these pills every single day and 30? Like,
Right,
I
and the fact that that would disrupt a lot of your day, especially if you have
yes.
to if you have to navigate your
Hmm.
day-to-day life and you have to plan out, "I have to take these at these certain, uh,
Yes.
like, intervals. How am
Mhm.
I gonna plan out work? How am I gonna plan out school,
Exactly.
romantic, interactions? Like, how are you gonna space these out?" So,
Yeah.
definitely going from 30 down to 2 is a
Hmm.
lot more manageable and it's gonna help them get back to daily life a lot easier. So that's absolutely an incredible story.
Yeah. I remember just like coming up to him, and I said, "Oh my goodness!" Like, I told him, I was like, "I was just looking at your face." Like, and he did tell me, he said, "Because I'm still in disbelief, because like, but it was due to people being fearless, and people really like pushing government to allocate these I talk allocate these resources in order for research to even be a thing, that he can live a life of normalcy, you know and there's also the whole thing about now, with making sure that you are adherent to your medication, that the campaign was, down to zero, or viral load down to zero, not being able to pass on the virus to another partner, because you don't have enough of a viral load in order for it to pass through your body to someone else. And that is huge. I mean, like, not only have you averted the whole thing about having a death sentence, because oftentimes that's what being infected with HIV was considered. Now you're able to have a romantic relationship and not be concerned about passing on the virus to your partner. And like, because like, 'cause some people say, "Oh my goodness, you're living with HIV," and that's like, yeah, but I'm adhering to my medication. I cannot infect you.
Mhm.
You know.
Yes. So going along with kind of the medical side of things, um, of course, there are a lot of people that are now considered undetectable, just as you were saying, and there's this movement um, informing people about the fact that undetectable equals untransmittable. For
Yes.
people who aren't yet in that particular uh, group, is there still a lot of stigma within the medical community? For
Mhm.
example, does the fear of interacting with healthcare professionals, fear of judgment, prevent them from getting access to becoming undetectable? Or how does that look like for them?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. And yes, that is definitely a thing, especially if you look at patients who happen to be Black or brown. There is a very long history of medical apartheid that happens to exist in the United States. You had inferences of Black women who were enslaved being experimented on, uh, when it came to the um, the discoveries of how to treat women gynecologically, right? Cisgender women. And uh, Dr. Miriam Sims often practiced his entire and scope on these women without even using anesthesia. And then fast forward to in the 1930s, you had the Tuskegee experiments where um, Black men were they were thought they were being treated for syphilis, but they really weren't. Sometimes they were getting placebo, sometimes they were getting experimental drugs. A lot of times, and a lot of these things without consent. Like, they were not being fully disclosed about exactly what the doctors were doing to these men, when it came to the experiments on the disease itself. I mean, they mostly allowed them to stay infected without them really even treating them, even though they knew that penicillin was a pretty effective a treatment for syphilis, because they wanted to see the effects on a person, from inception to infection to years and years and years. And that experiment lasted from the 1930s all the way up into the 70s, and it had to be a whistleblower who came forward to say that, hey, this is, and it was a government funded operation. And then there's just the whole notion of interaction with healthcare professionals while being Black, while being brown. And there's a lot of times, and this is well documented, where people will go in to see their doctor, or either a primary care physician or a specialist, and they're spoken down to. They And then there's also some stigma or some idea that you know Black people don't feel pain. And this is the same idea that Dr. Miriam Sims had when he experimented on enslaved Black women. And that's why he said, oh, well, they don't feel pain and they're just property, you know? And unfortunately, that was a notion that was carried for years and years and years down to other medical professionals. And because like you have this history, this deep, dark, dank history of how marginalized groups were treated by medical professionals, of course, that gets around, and it brings distrust to the medical industry, right? People don't want to go see a doctor. I known so many who will tell me, like sometimes if they knew that I was a healthcare social worker, they'll say, "Hey, I got this going on." I'm like, "Don't talk to me about that. I am not a doctor. You need to go see the doctor. That's what you need to do, honey." But I don't really like doctors, and I mean, and to be honest, like sometimes I stopped asking why because I know the answer and I get it, So there is a lot to work to do on the medical side of things to really create. I have to say create, not just build back, but create trust with marginalized groups in order for them to feel more comfortable coming in to see them in the first place. And a lot of that has to do with, their attitudes towards the groups and the people that happen to be sitting in their examination rooms in the first place. Um, and then also there the way that that can help is definitely recruiting others who happen to be like healthcare educators. I know that like we employed some of them when I was working with the first clinic that I was with. These are people who did outreach. They went to the clubs, they went to the balls, they did HIV testing, rapid testing right there, you know um, and they helped people get into care. And unfortunately, programs like that are being cut because of, the funding is not there anymore because, well, we know why. And it's a shame because that in of itself is so important to help people, come into care in the first place so that they can get the necessary treatment that they need. Because as we just discussed, people are not going to be so apt to just say, "Oh, I don't feel right. I need to go see a doctor." That's not always the first default of every person, and a lot of times it's because of their experiences that they had with the industry in the first place.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm very careful to address on this channel because we do talk about a lot of pseudoscience. We talk about, well, you just need to trust the professionals.
Mhm.
You should just not be trying to do things on their own. But so frequently, I have to bring up the fact that especially people of color um, have legitimate reasons to be skeptical and legitimate reasons to be cautious when engaging in those professional relationships. So it's a case where I get very angry with pseudoscientists con people because they prey on that. They prey
Yep.
on the distrust that is well deserved by a lot of the medical community. We made our bed and now we're being forced to lay in it.
Hmm.
Um, and that's something I agree. We do need to do a lot better about creating a better space. Um, and so that's where definitely these conversations are so important to make sure that we address this appropriately and don't just blame people for not wanting to go into an environment that harms them. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you bringing up that part of this. I know back in medical school, I had heard stories about HIV clinics, or even just primary care clinics where people who were HIV positive were treated as if they have the cooties, or they
Yeah.
have leprosy or something. And I guess you could probably compare the modern day treatment of people with HIV back to how people with leprosy were treated way back in the day. Are you aware of kind of any experiences like this? Have people told you about these stories, and just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have. You know, since this whole idea of the people who would normally who was considered the prime candidates to get infected were already people who happened to be as the normies would call it, the fringe groups, right? Then, there was this whole thing about, like, well, these people, because of their wayward lives and their wayward attitudes towards how they live it, deserve to be infected. And I don't necessarily want to touch them. I don't necessarily want to be around them. I I have a story. It doesn't take place in a medical facility, but it's adjacent. I remember when I was a Christian and I was in college, and there was a fellow parishioner who I worked with in our music ministry, who sang praise and worship, and who also directed the choir, and taught songs as well. And one I remember one day I was asking about him because I hadn't seen him in a while, and no one really couldn't tell me, like, what was going on with him. And so one day, um it was on a Sunday, the pastor gets up and he starts to address the young man. And he was saying that, well, he has AIDS. And at that particular time, he actually was, like, went from HIV to AIDS because he didn't know. He went for a while not getting treated because he didn't know he was infected with HIV in the first place. And he talked a lot about how you can't touch him, don't even hug him, don't even, you got to stay far away from him. And then started to interject the spiritual side of why he happens to be infected in the first place. Like, um, and would say, well, God will allow certain things to happen when you don't obey him, when you live a wayward life. What does the Bible said? He will turn you away to a reprobate mind, things of that nature. And what was worse about it is that the pastor had a nurse that has been nursing for a very nurse long time. Like, the woman was a nurse for over 35 years, and she co-signed on everything that pastor said in front of the entire congregation. And I sat there, Dr. Ben, I was flabbergasted, because even though at that time I'm in my 20s, I knew how people got HIV. I knew how infection happened. I mean, like, I was taking science classes in college because you need your gen eds in order for you to graduate. So, like, when you're talking about biology, you talk, sometimes, like, the topic of virology comes up, and different, viruses happen to come up as well. So I knew how infections happen since I was in grade school. So for them to get up and say these things, And the nurse, who knows better, co-sign on what the pastor said. Was like, I call that moment a series of the beginning of the end for me. Not necessarily belief, but not fucking with the church. Because this is the type of things that is being said over to people who would need help. And the thing is that the young man ended up, coming to church. He had a mask on. And the reason why, and they kept on saying, well, you can't touch him, you can't touch him. And they were saying it because you can get it too, because that's the way that it was being explained. But the reason why you couldn't touch him is because his CD4 count was extremely low. He could get any type of, like, if you got a cold, it'll turn into a flu or pneumonia with him. He doesn't have the immune system to fight off these things. It has to be built back up. And the only way that those can be built back up is by virally suppressing the HIV virus through medication. So by the time that he got stronger, his immune system started to reassert itself, he can be back in the population. But I tell you that I know that I didn't look at the pastor nor that nurse the same, because then I started to think to myself, especially with her, if you are with a patient who happens to be infected with HIV, how are you treating them?
Yeah, that is absolutely a great point. And I think the way you treat people in your everyday life is pretty reflective of how you're going to treat people when you're working, when you're not having the best day. Uh,
Hmm.
and and with
Oh,
this,
oh,
oh
one,
no,
one,
go ahead.
one second. I saw in the chat, somebody asked how long ago was that, just to get a grip on the timeline.
Mm.
Um, I want to say that happened. That whole thing happened in 2001. So, yeah, over 20 years ago, but still very much so by the time that we were very learned about, HIV infections, how it works, things of that nature. It wasn't something that was new.
So with the kind of community stigma, it sounds like these people are constantly facing a lot of social barriers. What does that do internally for people? Is there a lot of internalized stigma? And if
Hmm.
so, like, how do people navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like with anything that you might be dealing with, and you're ostracized for whatever. It makes you get to the point where you start to gaslight yourself, to the point that you don't believe you're worthy. You don't believe that you deserve to live. You don't believe that you should be getting any assistance whatsoever. I've had patients, come to me and say, if they're dealing with, living with HIV. And also, one of the populations that I worked with are trans women, and a lot of them happen to be Black and brown. And so you have, I'm stigmatized for being trans. I'm stigmatized for being a person of color. Plus, I'm stigmatized because I'm poor and I'm carrying HIV. And a lot of these people also grew up religious. Their parents carted them off to church every week. They would go on Sundays. They would go for Wednesday night or Tuesday night Bible studies. They were in vacation Bible school, yada yada yada. So they already are feeling the weight of not uh not being accepted by their own community that they grew up around, because of how they wanted to live an authentic life. Plus this. So so a lot of times, people would definitely develop a lot of these different, traumas, and gaslight themselves a lot. I like talking to, people, because it was such a fine line talking to people who grew up religious that were happen to be patients of mine, because by that time I was a full-blown atheist, like, very, very out and loud about it, but I was not but it wasn't something that I, like, evangelized, like, when I was at work, right? And I don't know how many times, Dr. Ben, I could tell you about talking to people, and, like, say for instance, if they're going through struggles because the money is not there, or because their housing hasn't come through yet, or they just need something to eat and they can't afford it. I don't know how many times I've heard, I believe that God is punishing me. And I would have to tell them, I'm like, no, 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 no. God is not punishing you. This happens just to be a circumstance that you are living through. But guess what? You're not there. There's help for you. And I understand that, it seems to be a long time coming, because, like, the biggest ask and the biggest need a lot of times for people who I was working with, it was housing. And even though, like, we had partnerships with, housing navigation throughout with different organizations, and could possibly even fast track some Section 8 vouchers, it still took a long time, and it was still a lot of red tape to get through. And just, trying to find, okay, well, I have this shelter that you can go to for right now. I'm working with the case manager there to help fast track your housing. It's going to take a bit. Just hold on for a little while longer. It was it it was a lot to try to lift people's spirits up, in order for, even though spirits may not be a good good term for two atheists talking right now, but that's the only term I got for right now. But it took a while to get them possibly out of this whole notion of, I I deserve this, right? Because, well, I either, slept with somebody, or I had, like, a few of my patients contracted HIV through needle sharing, or I even had, like, a couple that did get, blood transfusion, but those were the ones who was living with it for a very long time. Um, when I think that it was discovered that, blood transfusions without, testing it first, I want to say, like, that happened, like, in the mid 80s. They started to test for the virus, either mid to late 80s. They started to test for viruses when, when people would donate blood. Um, but it still didn't stop, regardless of how they got it. I would say that that doesn't even matter how you got it. Let's deal with the here and now. It's still, you still have to, like, talk. It's not a death sentence. It's not a death sentence. It's not a death sentence. You can live a full, healthy, vigorous life. You do not have to, start writing your epitaph right now. No, that's not the thing. No, you're not being punished. No, this is not something. Viruses happen to everybody. Remember COVID-19? So it's not something that is just like, I'm just going to get you because you're bad, and like the HIV virus is, like, literally, like, trying to um you know point at you, this, that, and the third, saying, I'm about to get you because of this, or I'm about to get you because of that. No, it's not, nothing like that. It's a virus. Viruses don't care. They, if with opportunity, they infect. Full stop. Right? So that was still like a big hump to get through for people who was actually living with the disease. Sometimes I was successful. Sometimes I needed help to say, hey, can you motivate, because I'm failing here. Like, it's like a fish out of water right now. Yeah, but that was definitely a thing to deal with right now.
Yeah, and along with that, and kind of the concept of these more invisible barriers, if you will, as we talked a little bit about housing, um, I know employment can be part of this, but kind of what other unseen barriers do a lot of these people have as they go about their everyday lives in society?
Um, well, I think that, like, one of the biggest things. is like navigating the whole healthcare system when it comes to making sure that you're attached to meds, making sure that you have or that you're aware of some of like, the different, programs that's available so you can get your medication because that's not always a thing. Um, how and also how to possibly find community where traditionally you had it but is no longer there.
Mhm.
Um, I knew people who live with it, who would not, even try to get medication only because they were concerned about what other people would say. I remember there was a young man who came into my office one time and he was out of care for over 3 years. And he was living, I think, with a family member who was super religious. And he was thinking that if he got saved, that he could ask God for forgiveness for him being gay, and then he would be able to get cured. And you already know the ending of that, right? So the first thing that I'd really do was just have to rush and just basically, talk to him about what the resources are because these are the things that he just didn't know. So like when you ask me like what are like the hidden things that maybe people don't necessarily are not aware of, it's like a lot of times they're just not aware of what's available. They're not aware that, places actually exist that specialize in not only treatment, but also dealing with some of the other things that they would need in order for them to be adherent. Like, um, it's important depending on like the a diagnosis that you might have. Let's just say, for instance, if you are HIV positive and you're also living with type 2 diabetes and you need to take insulin, you need a refrigerator. You can't, if especially if you have to take insulin, and especially if you're injecting insulin, you can't be able to take insulin and it's not stored in a proper place. So if you need a refrigerator, you need a roof over your head. You need electricity to power that refrigerator. You and also if you're living with type 2 diabetes, you need to eat regularly. You need a stove to cook food. So you need gas. You need all the basic shit that everybody needs in order for them to live and survive. And then some people will go around for almost a lifetime not necessarily knowing or thinking that yes, resources are available. Are they being attacked and eroded right now? Absolutely. I I know that in recent time that well, we already know that the Department of Health and Human Services have shrunk what they have done. They have repurposed money that's supposed to go to AIDS research. That's supposed to go to, other things to, help with other resources that, people who are living with HIV needs to have. Department of Housing and Urban Development, where a lot of times you got these Section 8 vouchers from who worked with the Department of Health and Human Services, also did the same thing. And so it's like the the resources are not completely gone. They're still there, but they are in a more minuscule number. And I I want to make other people aware about these things and why it's so important for us to not necessarily sit on the sidelines and not speak up about these things. Because people who happen to be living with this disease are they're human beings. They're part of our community too. And it's important for them to be able to get the things that they need because guess what? That could be your sister, your brother. your cousin, your mother, your father, your family. That could be anybody, your neighbor down the street, around the corner. It doesn't matter. This could happen to anybody. And the only way that we ever get change, and as people from ACT UP has shown, is through pressure, organizing, and speaking up and not giving up.
Yeah, there we have so much work ahead of us, and there are a lot of roadblocks continually being thrown in the way. But this is where we need people to stand up, use your voice, go to the Capitol, call your senators, call your representatives. Like, do not let them hurt people like this. Like this absolutely does matter, and especially right now, this matters so much. So I
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you for allowing me to do it. I I don't know if like if we had a little time to go through.
Oh, we have so much time. Yeah, we usually go for
Okay.
an hour and a half, so we're
Oh,
we're
okay, cool,
we're
cool, cool,
good
cool.
on that.
Okay,
Because
cool.
I still have some really uh, intense points to get to in the questions
Yes,
as well, and I think you,
let's do
yeah.
that.
So kind of bridging this gap then too. I know we started touching on uh, societal factors and kind of social issues,
Mhm,
getting more into that, and as we get into the things everybody really wants to know about, which is intimacy and relationship
mhm,
discussions, um, but kind of bridging this gap towards that, this culture and especially the legal system surrounding disclosure. This is definitely something I want to discuss.
yes.
So, what are the rules now? Have those changed kind of over time, and then how does this impact people on the individual level?
Right. So, there was a time where if you were infected with HIV and your partner got infected and you didn't tell them, that would be considered a crime. And in some cases, I need to check, but I think in some cases, federally, I believe that that's still considered a crime. But I think that around, okay, but before I say I think I'm around, let me actually look up the language. So give me just one moment. HIV, thank you, Google, for being uh there. so so one of the things, okay, this is something that I just got from Gemini. So it says that nearly two-thirds of the United States have laws criminalizing potential HIV exposure, with 24 requiring disclosure to sexual partners and 14 in needle sharing partners. These laws often penalize behavior with low transmission risks, such as oral sex or spitting. Some states, like Illinois, have repealed these laws in favor of non punitive approaches. So I know that in my particular state, the disclosure laws are a bit more porous, only because if you are at an undetectable space, in an undetectable space rather, then you are not necessarily required to disclose because you don't have because you cannot pass the virus, right? But not every state, of course, like I said, is like that. So and and many states even make it a crime not to disclose your HIV positive status to partners, even if no transmission occurs. So you do have like 32 states that still have some form of HIV specific criminal laws, and it varies specifically. And I will put in the chat some more, let's see, some a link. I'm going to put it in our private chat, Ben, and maybe you can
Okay,
share it with people
perfect.
about like some of the work that has been done to decriminalize HIV disclosure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because yeah, that's definitely still a thing. It's you still have a higher transmission rate in the Bible Belt more than
Mhm.
anything when it comes to HIV. Um, and it's in a lot of those states that happen to be like, within that time, within that location, like red states, southern states, things of that nature, have criminalization for people who don't disclose. And it's a very fine line, because if you think about it, when people were infected, and especially like if you're looking at in poorer communities, people of color, and especially like if we're looking back in the day, how you were presenting yourself could be dangerous for you. And uh, and and we know that people there's still a very high murder rate of Black transgender women, um, some that don't even see the age of 35. So can you imagine, with being already stigmatized because of the way that you presenting yourself, to possibly, oh, and by the by, I'm living with HIV. That is a potential very dangerous situation for a person to be in if they're looking to be intimate with somebody. So this is why, you know, I had patients, because I've asked the question. I said, how do you feel about disclosure? And some of them told me that I tell them up front, but a lot of times the people who said that they had told their partner, they've been with their partner for quite some time. Sometimes their partner's living with it too. So it would depend on the situation. It's not like a black and white thing, right? It's very nebulous. It's very nuanced. Like when it to like how you would even broach that particular subject in the first place. Um, so so yes, there's still a thing, according to like how states would deal with that. But I guess we're lucky for Illinois that they've repealed that, even though like you do have people who said that's not fair, you shouldn't do that, yada yada yada. And I'm like, okay, but you're not really getting the whole picture when it comes to disclosure in the first place, and especially the science behind transmission. And and to be honest, and this is the way that I put it, you know, to be honest, in my opinion, disclosure should happen to the person who's living with it and their potential partner without interference from the peanut gallery. I think that that's a very personal, intimate conversation that one should have with another. And I damn sure don't believe that people should be criminalized, go to jail, or any of those things. It's different. And now they're like, the federal law is different when a person is infected, not getting treatment, and purposely infecting other people. That's a crime. That is a
Yeah,
crime.
that is definitely a very, very important distinction, and one that I
Yes.
think a lot of people would not be aware of if they weren't familiar with
Hmm.
this situation.
So yeah, but like you just said, it's different from you happen to be, if you're infected and you happen to be undetectable, so you're untransmittable, than a person, if you're intimate with them, you're not going to be able to pass on the virus. So it's up to that individual how, if they even want to even have that conversation with that person in the first place. um I normally say, just because you're taking, like, medication doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to keep you from all STIs or sexually transmitted
Mhm.
infections. So you should still practice, safer sex.
Hmm.
There's no such thing as safe sex, but safer sex.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, how that even looks is up to that individual. And I dare not. I'm not Jesus. I'm not gonna get involved with your bedroom. I put it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. And as far as this disclosure issue, of course, there's going to be two facets of this: the intimacy side of it,
Hmm.
and then also just within society. Like you had mentioned, the church interactions, and it seems like once people know, like once the cat is out of the bag, that you kind of get this label of being associated with any number of degenerate communities. Have you seen examples where people have been, forced to say something to their families or church communities, or maybe they're going to a pharmacy picking up their medications and then somebody witnesses it? And how do those interactions go, and how much does this affect people?
Well, I think that the main uh thing that I've witnessed myself is like about the story that I was telling you earlier about the young man that I worked with at the church, and how he was basically outed. And that wasn't the first time that I've seen people were, being gay, let alone living with HIV. And a lot of times they would get treated. I would see specifically in the church that I was part of is that depending on how the pastor treated you would be a determining factor of how the people treated you. If the pastor was cool with you, they cool with you. If the pastor not cool with you, they not cool with you. Lucky for him, because he sang very well and was charismatic, for the most part, the pastor was cool, right? But I've seen, people basically turn others away and basically, shunned them because they were out.
Mhm.
And a lot of times they were out because they were forced. I remember specifically, it was a couple of times that people I would, be at church with, and if they got outed, it was because like the pastor brought them in front of the entire congregation and decided to tell everybody their business.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so messed up. This is so messed up. And I mean, and in their eyes, they're looking at it as this is accountability. But
Mm.
to me, that's not accountability. That's just being a bully. That's you displaying power just because you can. I don't, and I mean, like, and I don't necessarily see how that is helpful to the person that you're outing in the first place. Like, how is that going to allow them to live a more fulfilled life, or even like how is that going to evolve of sin or what have you, just because you did this and you feel like it's your God-given right to do because of your position? Like, how dare you? You know? And like I know that, like, sometimes depending on, where a person is, like I've heard stories about people going to a pharmacy picking up their medications, and instead of the pharmacist, you know, saying, come to the consult and let's talk about what you're taking. And if you have any questions about this, get on the loudspeaker. Um, your Discovery is ready. Like,
Wow. That is not okay.
no, it's not. And
That is absolutely not okay.
yeah, that's no, it's not. And it's against HIPAA laws. So, you don't do that. Like, I get really mad when I see people try to push their ideologies on other people just because they're not like them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when things like this happen, especially for people who are living with HIV, is because the person that's doing the harm is completely ignorant. And you would think that even a pharmacy tech would have some knowledge about what this medication is. They should. They got certified in that. They went to school for this. Like, they're supposed to be um on different medications, their effects and what they're for. But, but sometimes like spiritual ideas completely supersede that, and then all of a sudden you become boo-boo the fool. And it's like, you don't, again, it goes back to this whole thing about how you are dealing with the person, how they're presenting, and your notions, and whether if you want to employ your cognitive dissonance or not. Like, it's not up to you. It's not up to you ever to feel that you can do this, can person for whatever you feel like you can because of your beliefs, or because you feel like this person is not following a societal norm or whatever. It's not your place. And and as I said before, like, this, a lot of this is because of ignorance. It's lack of education. It's and we know that lack of education and ignorance breeds stigma. It breeds it. It metastasizes like cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's because of people just want to stay in the dark. They want to stay in this whole blinder thing about this is the way that life is supposed to go, and that's just not the way that it works.
Do you, I want to know your thoughts on the burden of education, this
Mhm.
idea that people have to educate everybody else in their lives because other people either don't want to learn on their own or just haven't been exposed to things. How does that impact this community specifically?
I think that I know a little something about that. Because like for a long time, like when I would, do my rounds on YouTube, I was that Black chick that talked about racism.
Mm.
And I remember me and another friend of mine who happened to be an atheist, and was talking about this whole burden of education. And I was saying, I was like, I choose to educate because because I've seen specifically what lack of education can do. But it's not, I don't necessarily feel it's fair or right to put that burden on that particular person or group or what have you to educate those who happen not to have that lived experience. And especially since we are living in the technological age where books are available, articles are available, documentaries are available. Hell, download the freaking PBS app. It's free.
Yeah.
Just, I'm just saying, there's so many different resources that are available out there right now that people can just lean themselves to. But the problem is that we live in a culture of misinformation. I remember listening to a political pundit, and he made this analogy about misinformation. It says a lie has traveled the world 25 to 100 times before the truth can get up and put its pants on in the morning. And that's because that's the culture that we breeded. We breeded a culture of propaganda and not a fact. Like how many times, like Dr. Ben, have you been on different streams when you're doing call-in shows? And how many times did you have to repeat yourself with a person when it comes to whatever the fuck that they decided? Can I say fuck? I hope I say fuck because
Yeah,
I
you
said
can say
fuck.
that.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank greats. Okay, how many times have you, try to educate a person who continuously repeats the same dummy shit over and over again to you.
Oh,
And
so many times.
because I've seen
Yeah.
you do it. You know, and like, people would think that they would know more than you just because whatever, they just feel that they know more than you, and they're trying to tell you about something that you studied for years. Like, do you
Mhm.
even know what this means? Like, they like, like, no, just say you don't know, and then maybe you can get educated about something. But and see, but that's the problem that we're having as a society, is that we have way too many people, and a lot of them are emboldened because of the rhetoric that we're getting from the people who are in charge, that they can basically walk around like pseudoscientists and pseudo sociologists, and they feel that they are emboldened in order for them to repeat rhetoric and propaganda instead of actually sitting down and being taught facts. And also, the society is not one where we are very heavy on critical thinking and skepticism. Those need to be taught, and they're not. We teach children by rote. I remember getting up in my third grade class and having timetables contest. A lot of times, because I went to Catholic school, they used to pit the boys against the girls. And, we had to learn the times tables. One times one is one times two is two, yada, 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 and then, memorize those things. But it wasn't until much later that we get into the mechanics of why this multiplied by this is that, right? So since, we're teaching, a lot of times we're teaching by rote and by memory, we don't really get a chance to get into the function of things. Why is this way? Why is evolution true? Why do we have why are we related to apes? why why are we apes? How did single cell bacteria formulate into more complicated organisms to eventually form the species on the earth? Like, and we're still fighting having creationism versus evolution being taught in public schools. I mean, like, what the fuck? So this is the fight that we're constantly against. So can you imagine, this is the foundation of America, and then having to be a person who they took the time to learn your craft, to learn the history of, to learn the function of, and then you having to present yourself to a person who doesn't even want to go beyond the rote that is their foundation. It's freaking exhausting. But I personally don't know how to really get from not educating, because it's so necessary, it's so needed. And I understand that there are, people who may have, listened to a stream of yours, Dr. Ben, or maybe have, heard a commentary that I've done after I just, almost like tore out what little hair I have left off of my head about whatever, and say, you know what, I'm grateful that you actually, approached this topic. I didn't know, and I'm glad that you took to talk about this, because now I have more knowledge, and I can function better as a human being, because now I'm no longer in the dark about this.
Yeah. And kind of along this, society of misinformation, carrying that into one of the big hot button topics of today, and that is intimacy and relationships. So there's
Mm,
been, of course, a big cultural shift in how HIV is perceived, but also there's been a huge shift in dating culture in general. So kind of back several years ago, what was the climate like? And then now in this more digital dating culture age,
Mhm.
has anything changed, or are people still having the same struggles, or are there new struggles in this time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The best way that I can answer that is that, remember when a person was infected with HIV in the 80s, it was considered a death sentence. And a lot of times it was, because even when medication was available, it was not always it was not always effective, and it definitely wasn't to the point where HIV could get to the point where you are not transmitting it to a potential partner. So people actually being able to think that they could even have like a life where they are able to have a full romantic experience any longer without um without being burdened by the disease, was definitely an issue that a lot of people were was dealing with. And now fast forward to today, we have undetectable means untransmittable. And so that opens up the notion of, I can now be intimate with a partner. I don't necessarily have to use a condom, or I don't have to use, if like I said, when it comes to like how you practice safer sex, I want to leave that up to you, to the audience, and how you do that on your own. I'm not going, like I said, I don't get in people's bedrooms. Like, do you just be safe and be consenting. I just need everybody who get involved to be adults and consent. That part. So
Absolutely, 100%.
yes. So, and I mean, like, as a person who is no longer like in, I was like in a partnership, and I no longer am. It is trying to navigate the whole like dating thing. Sometimes I just like, I personally, like, I'm tired, I'm fuck it. But I mean, but like that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is not going to necessarily go to my default. Regardless of that, people, still having to navigate through technology, and also um using dating sites and things like that, because they want to meet people. And then you still have to go through the whole notion of, will I disclose or will I not disclose? It's a whole kettle of worms that, like, people would have to navigate through, that maybe not necessarily been a thing 30, 40 years ago. But it's still, but even though that, as we just mentioned previously, there's so much data, so much information, so many people that I've known that have been able to not only meet people, get married, a have a whole romantic life, and still living with HIV. It's possible. I think that, like, the primary thing is just to get through like the muck and dodge the stigma in of itself, in order for people to even know that that's something that's even available to them. Because a lot of times, the first two things that will come up if a person is newly infected, especially if they're really not sure about all the leaps forward that we have had when it comes to managing the disease, that they either say, I'm going to die, and I'm not going to be able to love anyone else again.
That sounds very isolating, and I think that's an experience that, like, we can hypothesize to ourselves what somebody living with HIV would be going through, but little things like that, I mean, it's not a little thing, but it's a thing that it would not be thought of by most of us. The fact that this is such an isolating thing for a lot of people, and they do have to carry that with them every day. And
Yeah.
we we need to be more aware of things people are going through behind the scenes.
Precisely. Yeah, I mean, and I know that's like a lot of times one of the main focuses that, as a case manager, that we're working with people living with HIV and having to go through HIV counseling, is really the whole thing about helping people discover that their life is not over and that they don't have to be isolated. They still can enjoy life. They still can have things available to them that they had before. It's not over. Life is not over. And that's the thing that um, that has to be continuously um, what's the word I'm looking for? Continuously emphasized, so that people who may not even been exposed to nearly a choop, as my mother would say, a sliver of the information, can now be not necessarily burdened with this whole trauma of being infected in the first place.
And then kind of going along with this, there's of course a lot of people that, like you said, no longer have a death sentence.
Yeah.
So we're definitely seeing a shift in the age of people living with HIV, and I know in the future we're going to have thankfully, a growing population uh, of older people, of
Hmm.
people living into their 60s, 70s, and even 80s with HIV. How do you predict that, like, this particular aging population may have different healthcare needs, different social needs,
Hmm.
and what should we be thinking about as we look towards that kind of future?
Yeah, so we have a pretty robust aging population right now, and we actually have people who are like seniors that are living with the disease, right? They're living with it, and they're managing it, and they're still managing, maybe if they have comorbidities, they're managing those too, right? I've had, like, a few people that were in their 60s and their 70s that were also my patients. So, and they would tell me some of the stories about the things that they have seen. Like, some of them were activists within the ACT UP movement, and I think that what is needed, as we are experiencing more and more people coming into senior citizenhood, that we need to make sure that the proper um, resources for them to be able to live are still there. I mean, we have an attack on Social Security. I remember when uh, W, and people who don't know who W is, that's George W. Bush, was trying to push for Social Security to be privatized. So there was never a guarantee that by the time that you get to your golden years, that you would even have, like, Social Security in the first place, because they wanted to take all that money, billions and billions and billions of dollars, and put it into the market, and basically, 401k, 401k your Social Security, which is a right for any citizen to take advantage of, especially when you paid into it all your working life. So we need to make sure the resources are there. We need to make sure that those social safety nets are there. We need to make sure that Medicare, expansive Medicare, is available. I am very much so, I bleed pink. I am a left wing commie. So I believe in, Medicare for all, social, single payer healthcare. Because, like, another thing that happens a lot is that people who happen to be in the American healthcare system, you know, you know, forbid them coming up with some type of disease that, or any condition, any condition whatsoever that may not be covered under their insurance, and how it's a possibility that they have to pay out of pocket for treatment and go bankrupt. There's so many people that have had to declare bankruptcy just because they um just because they happen to absorb a medical debt. And that shouldn't be a thing. So, I mean, there are studies and data that's available the on what that population of seniors are going to look like in the future, especially were who are living with HIV, and now they are still, managing it, but they're probably, not probably, they are going to need additional resources in order for them to continuously manage that, alongside with with other possible um, chronic conditions that could happen to them when they get older. So it's basically just making sure that we strengthen a lot of the social safety nets and resources that have been put into place for people, so that they are not necessarily having a quality of life that has been diminished just because they're getting older and still living with HIV.
Absolutely. I co-sign all of that. um So, kind of for the next little bit, I know you had an article that you kind of wanted to touch on. So,
Hmm.
I'll let you pick the order that we do things. So, I've got a few questions that I'll leave for the end to kind of wrap up. Um,
Hmm.
but I've saved a couple questions that we can address kind of near the end as well. So, would you like to do the article bit next and then move on to questions? Or would you like to do the reverse?
So yeah. So one of the things that, oh yeah, we can do the article now. So like let me
Okay.
do a present and a screen of sharing, and share screen, and then let me see if I can find, was it this one? I think so. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome.
So this is, so like, one of the things that we kind of like touched on basically was the treatments that people are able to receive now, and to actually get them to zero, undetectable, and how that is a game changer on how they're able to live their lives. Well, this is an article that came out, this was on February 4th from LGBTQ Nation. It's called okay, that stupid Hulu thing came into place. It's called "The Amazing Cases of 9 People Cured of HIV. Each contain clues about a possible cure." And so I just want to get a little bit into this. So, for more than a decade, doctors and researchers have announced that a handful of people around the world have been cured of HIV. Each of these patients have experienced long-term viral control, in some cases over a decade, without antiretrovirus therapy, or ARTs, as AIDS map notes. Though some doctors describe them as being in remission. Now, while the patients have shown no signs of HIV since stopping ART, at least some uncertainty remains as to whether the virus could eventually rebound in them. However, according to Helio, since any viral rebound would likely have occurred within weeks or months, many experts are more than comfortable describing the patients as cured. Let me see. I wanted to.
That is incredible, though.
It
It's
is.
cool that we're starting to see that.
It is. I mean, because like you can see like how there have been breakthroughs, even like how people are dealing with ARTs, to the point where they're not taking pills every day, but they're taking injections. I know that there was a injection that came on the market, I want to say about a year or so ago, where you can get an injection of your ART and have it to the point where you are getting them twice a year. So you just like make an appointment with your primary care physician, get an injection, and then that is going to manage your viral load until the next time that you see your PCP. So it cuts down exponentially on pill fatigue, right?
Mhm.
So so here's a little bit more on the story. So it says, at the same time, experts caution that these are extremely rare and specific cases. Each patient receive a stem cell transplant to treat either leukemia or lymphoma, an extreme and invasive procedure that poses its own risk. As Dr. Bjorn Jensen, a senior consultant of the Dusseldorf University Hospital, told NPR in 2024, patients frequently do not survive the aftermath of the procedure, and in the case of those who have been cured of HIV, the transplants were only attempted because they were the only options left for them. So there are variants of HIV where the traditional treatments and are not going to are they don't work. It's kind of like how in some cancer patients that if if they've gone through like chemo, if they've gone through radiation, if they've gone through some other traditional treatments, that oftentimes the only thing that's left for them to do is a possible stem cell transplant. I know that I have I have one of the doctors that I used to work with. Her father had multiple myeloma, and he ended up undergoing stem cell treatment. That helped him survive for another 10 years in remission. But unfortunately, the cancer reasserted itself and it took his life. But it did give him an additional time for his life. So and I know that there have been like some different studies and things of that nature concerning um HIV treatment using stem cell research. It's still, but it's not necessarily something that is um, prevalent because it's still in the beginning stages. And stem cell research, as you know, Dr. Ben, is something that has been used in potential treatments for a lot of chronic conditions. So I still thought it was pretty interesting that you had this possibility of people actually, being called cured. I know that like that's not necessarily a word that we like to use for a lot of people who are infected with the virus, or even with cancer, because there's always like this whole notion about the disease can come back, the cancer can come back, the infection can come back, and viruses can show up in a different variant and be even more deadlier than what they were previously. So I'm wondering, and I'm hoping, I want to still kind of like look into this a little bit further, and maybe come back, and after I've done a little bit more learning about it, so that we can possibly even talk about like the possibility of an HIV cure, because that
Oh
really
yeah, that'd be
fascinates
great.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we can definitely do another episode talking about that, and also adding in some kind of online myths about HIV. We could do like a part 2.
Yes, that'd be lovely.
All right. We have a few questions
Nice.
from the side chat that I was holding on to.
Mhm.
So the first one, we have a super chat from Skeptoidius. It says, I was reading somewhere that there's this new medicine that allows HIV positive to have intimate relationships without the risk of passing it on. And I know that we touched on this earlier on in the conversation.
Mhm.
But can you recap that a little bit for this question?
Yeah, the antiretrovirus treatments that people are taking now, Skeptoideus, by the way, cool name, um, are designed to suppress the virus of HIV point where it is so it gets suppressed to the point where your immune system actually reasserts itself, and you cannot pass on the virus. So once you get to the point where the virus is what they call undetectable, then that means that it will be untransmittable. So the campaign that was being ran, I want to say, especially like when I first started into social work working with HIV patients, is U equals U. Untransmittable means undetectable. Now there are ARTs that are offered in injection form. So people, as I was just saying earlier, people are able to just make an appointment with their doctors and get an injection. Um, Kind of like, when your kids get like, have like an MMR, and they are able to just do those injections like twice a year, and they can still remain undetectable so that they are not transmitting the disease.
Yeah, incredible development in that.
Mhm.
The next question we have is from Deviant Outcast asking, do people with HIV in the US have to pay full price for their healthcare and medicine?
Mhm. That's a great question. So, there are ways where there have been subsidies for people living with HIV to get healthcare and treatment without coming out of pocket. Oftentimes, it is driven by income and also status, like how are you here in the country. So, the first one is Medicaid. Medicaid, if you are on the program, can receive treatment and also medication for no cost out of pocket. However, there's criteria that you have to meet in order for you to be able to qualify for Medicaid. One is you have to be at a certain income level. So oftentimes that means that you're at or below the federal poverty line. And depending on who's in office, the federal poverty line shifts up and down. Um, so that's an issue. But if you also are not but if we're looking at, why did I say but twice? I'm sorry. Also, if you are looking at a person's immigration status and you happen to qualify income wise for Medicaid, you either have to be a permanent resident or a citizen in order for you to be able to get Medicaid. If you happen to be undocumented, you don't qualify. Now, there is another program for people who are living with HIV that is also income based driven, but the income is a little bit higher, and this is for people to take who can take it, who can qualify for it. And I believe that income that document status, as far as like immigration status, is not a factor. It's just mostly what is your income level and are you infected? And if you meet that criteria, then you can get involved. You can get access, and it's called ADAP. Okay. Now I have to look up what ADAP means. Just give me one moment.
No
ADAP.
problem.
Thank you, because I forgot. AIDS Drug Assistance Program, which is a federal and state funded program providing free or low cost HIV and AIDS medications to uninsured or underinsured low income low income individuals. So that particular program is something that people can have access to as long as they meet that criteria. So luckily, document status or how you are in the country is not a factor. And a lot of times, if I was, because like I did have um, a pretty sizable population of folks that I was working with that were undocumented, that some of them were even DACA recipients, and I was able to use ADAP in order to help them get their medication, and also be able to be uh, attached to healthcare and primary care.
Awesome. Thank you for that awesome answer to that very complex question. And we have a couple medication related questions from Miranda. So the first one is, have the HIV meds been formally studied in older patients yet? And at least from my knowledge, the answer would be yes. And there are established guidelines for how to utilize these medications in that population.
Mhm.
Cynthia, do you know anything specific about this question?
Well, what you said basically, and also that and there's also, like, the considerations for people who happen to be older, living with comorbidities as well. So um, it's important for doctors to have those particular studies available so that they'll know exactly which medications in order for them to prescribe to older adults living with HIV, and especially if they happen to be living with another chronic condition, because you don't want to have issues with your medications fighting one another.
Awesome. And Miranda's second question is, can you please talk a little bit about PrEP and PEP?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. So PrEP is okay. Let me go pull those up, because I don't want to just tell you this off the top of my head stuff. I want to make sure that I'm using the right terminology. Okay. 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 So let's go over PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylactics. That's what PrEP stands for. And what PrEP is are medications that people can take in order to prevent them from becoming HIV positive. So it's normally prescribed to people, and I hate this term, but this is how they often categorize people. Is It's determined if you happen to be in a high risk infection group. So who is considered high risk? Gay men are considered high risk. Trans women are considered high risk. And now, finally, Black women are considered high risk. Cisgender Black women are considered high risk. And we can always go into the particulars of why that is, especially with Black women. But I'm going to save that for another stream, because it's a lot of cultural barriers and things of that nature that has to do with Black women being a high risk population. But yes, so they're prescribed. It's basically a pill that you can take, or I don't know if they. I know that last time that I was working with HIV patients, they were working on an injectable form of PrEP that people can use. So, and it would basically work along the same guidelines as, like, an ART injection. Either every 2 months or every 6 months, a person comes in, they can get an injection, and it helps to protect them against being infected with the HIV virus. So that's PrEP. Now, PEP is post exposure prophylactics. This is when you are there's a very strong possibility that you may have been infected with the virus. And if you can get to your doctors or primary aid, or even the ER, you know right away, within like a day or two, or what have you, then there is a series of like, PrEP medication that they can give you, sometimes ART medication. It really just depends on that individual, because a lot of times they do labs first in order for them to figure out which medication to give you to basically quell the virus before it can assert itself and start to continuously copy to attach itself to the CD4 cells. So that's what PrEP is, and that is what PEP is. Pre-exposure prophylactics help you prevent HIV. Post-exposure prophylaxis, helping HIV not to basically, metastasize in your body.
Awesome. And last question that I've seen so far is from Robin. Does the Chronic Disease Fund pay for HIV medications?
I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah, we can find the answer to this.
Yeah, let's find out. That's a very good question. I know that like HIV specifically has its own fund. Like I was talking about the Ryan White fund that is mostly in charge of that's controlled by Congress and appropriates money for resources and research when it comes, and also medication, and it's like doled out through that particular program. But yeah, but the Chronic Disease Fund, let's see, for HIV medication. Let's see. So at this particular point, the only thing that I'm showing, and this is something that I'm probably just going to have to just do a little bit more research on, are the programs that I was referencing previously that was actually available to pay for HIV medication, which is, the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, and also, efforts through Medicaid. It qualifies for those particular for any of those particular healthcare initiatives.
All right. And then we have another super chat from Miranda saying, thank you both for such an important and informative stream. Thank you for your super chat, Miranda. And yeah, this has been an absolute wealth of information from Cynthia today. I do have 3 more questions just looking forward, because obviously HIV is here. People are living with it. There's still a lot of stigma in place. So how do we move forward from this? And I guess one question before we even get into the future side of things, there's a lot of power in language and how we talk about things. So what are some phrases or terms that people will use that are incorrect and contribute to stigma, and what should people say instead?
Well, I think like one of the things that if you notice, I would refer to people as living with HIV, because like one of the things that you're taught as a social worker is to have what we call people first language. So if you happen to be living with a condition, it's a difference with living with a condition versus the condition defining who you are as a person. So it's like I'm living with high blood pressure, but I'm just not I'm just not I'm just like she got high blood, she got the sugar, things of that nature, like things, like how we're referencing like people and how we are, talking to them about it. And that matters. And the reason it matters is because it's definitely going to inform on how you, the patient, and how the healthcare professional and people around you are speaking with you, and even informs on how you are treating them as an individual. Because like if you are constantly putting forward that you have, that means you are. Like you are an AIDS patient, you are an HIV patient. No, you are a person. You are a human being. You are an individual with personality and rights and all the different things that any person who happens to be on this earth deserves. You just happen to be living with this. And and if we can get to the point where we can say, well, you're just living with it, then we can actually have proper conversations on how to live with it and still be able to live.
That was great. That quote alone right there is pretty powerful. Um, if you could dismantle one specific social myth about HIV, which one would it be?
I think that I think that one of the things that I would love to dispel is an issue that happens with populations of people who happen to be vulnerable, um, and and are attacked in certain ways because of a disease in the first place. And I did not say that the way that I wanted to say it, but let me just give an example. So right now we see like some of the highest rates of HIV infections and new cases are with, like, Black women, and a lot of those cases are with Black women who happen to also be living in poverty. And the same with trans women and gay men, and especially those who happen to be people of color that are Black and brown. High transmission rates are there as well. And because that is the case, there are an it's like society immediately writes these people off because traditionally they always have. We've seen the same thing happen during the pandemic when the numbers started to come out with infection rates and mortality rates extremely high amongst Black and brown people. And there's this idea when, and I know I've seen a lot of headlines, especially between 2020 and 2022, when America catches a cold, Black America catches the flu. And I want it to be a place where we are putting in the right things and the right resources and the right institutions and the right training and all and everything that needs to be done in order for the flu to no longer be a thing in these communities.
Yeah, and that's definitely a great example of why equity is so important. And someone's gonna complain about me being woke. Well, good, because we're woke here and we're proud of it because empathy is human. Um,
Exactly.
and yeah, equity more so than equality in this case. 'Cause like you're saying, there are people who are disproportionately affected the worst.
Yeah,
And if you want to do everybody justice, then your efforts do need to be different. The level
exactly.
you need to get everybody to the same outcome, it requires a lot different effort.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, so the short of it, like, we need health equity in all
Mhm.
areas in order for us to not have to worry about who is going to get the right health care depending on what zip code they happen to be in at that time, or what
Yeah.
color that they happen to possess, or their gender presentation, or all these other things that we have made a thing that should not be a thing on how we relate to human beings.
I 100% agree with you there. And
Mhm.
kind of my last question for you, um, is what is the role of an ally in all of this? How can we help? Where are we needed? where can we get involved without stepping on the toes of people who are experiencing this?
So, anytime that I talk about allyship, is I want to express whether if you are trying to push health equity, racial equity, gender equity, period, that support the people who are doing the work. There's so many wonderful organizations that happen to be in place right now that are doing the work. They are going to Congress. They are talking to senators. They are talking to Congress people. They are engaging the White House. They are showing up in places in local governments, in state governments, and federally. Support them. Find out, about HIV organizations that have been, around for a long time. Find out, there's even like some that like serve niche populations, like, Black folk that's living with the disease. I think about Brave Alliance that actually like supports, transgender women, especially transgender women of color. There's so many, and I mean, like, I could like pull up a whole list of them right now, but I would encourage people to do that work on their own, and give to them if you're able to, you know, and make yourself available to the information out there when it comes to this disease, because I think that people a lot of times think, because it's not headline news any longer, that it's magically have gone away. No, HIV is still a thing. HIV is still affecting lives. HIV is still deadly if not treated, you know, and there are still people who are living with it, or who and they may or may not know that they have it, and they're not adjacent to treatment, and there's could be a plethora of reasons why. So it's important for us to be aware of these particular things, so that if you call when you call yourself an ally, you can properly, not only are you informed, but you know where the pain points are, and you can help fill in the gap.
Well, this has been an amazing talk with you today, Cynthia, and I do think there's more to be said, and it would definitely be worth another conversation. I'm definitely going to be sharing this out to people who I think need to listen to this.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, this is great. It's kind of like pros and cons of delaying it for 6 years. We have some more information as far as where our society is now as opposed to back in 2020. Um,
Mhm.
but I feel bad that I kept putting it off for so long, but I'm happy that we were able to do it today.
Yeah, I am too. But I also was very well aware of, you were a whole medical student,
Yeah.
and also serving and you were also in the National Guard too, right?
I was in the army.
In
It's
the
active
army.
duty. Yep.
Active
Yeah.
duty army while going to school. You good. You're fine. So no, but I'm glad that I'm glad that we were able to do it. And I'm hoping that this was a good information for others to attach themselves to say, hey, I got another wrinkle in my brain because I learned something, and now I can go ahead and share it with others. So that's the if that when that happens, hey, I'm happy.
And one more time for the audience that kind of got here near the end, can you share who you are, where people can find you, and do you have any events or anything coming up that you want to let us know about?
Sure. So again, my name is Cynthia. I am a social worker here in the city of Wind, and I also have a channel called The Roots Matter, where I do commentary on news and politics um, from a skeptical humanist point of view, and as I like to say, where news, politics, skepticism, secularism, and all the other things collide. So basically, I'm just like blowing up on your screen. Like literally, there's a bomb. I press a button and it just explodes in your face. No, I'm just joking. I do have a live stream that's happening tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on my channel. My guests are going to be um, Jason Friedman, Scott Dickey, and Teo Ateo, El Ateo. And we're going to be doing our perfidious panel, our faithless forum, and we're going to be talking about some news stories and giving our takes on it, and also, um, inviting the wider audience to join us in the chat so that we can have a very fully robust conversation. So, you all want to go ahead and join the live, please do. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll be sure to put links in the description for people to go find that. It sounds like lots of great stuff going on, and I'm super excited to see what's next for you.
Yes, I'm super excited to come on here again, and so we can have our part two discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and everyone in the audience, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support. I agree with all of the comments that say that Cynthia is an absolute powerhouse,
Aw.
and I appreciate having you around.
Aw, thank you. Ben, when you're not busy, I would love for you to grace me with your presence as well. Please and thank
Yes, I will definitely return the
you.
favor on your show.
Yay!
Yeah.
I'm gonna be coming up with some
So let's
dates.
see that at some point soon. Yep. Yep.
Yes.
We will chat for sure.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
thank you, everybody. Anything else that you want to leave the audience with before we say goodbye?
Stay grounded, stay informed, and remember at the end of the day, the roots matter. That's my
Thanks.
tagline.
Take care, everyone. Have a great
Take care,
weekend.
everybody. Bye.